Okay, so today we are going to be talking about Canterbury Tales and some of the background information that you need to know before we begin. So why are we reading this? One of the reasons that Chaucer is so important is that he made the decision to write in English and not French. At the time, following the Norman invasion, so after 1066, when the medieval period began, French was considered to be a higher language, and so most people in power and most important documents and anything considered to be worthy of recording in the written word generally was recorded in French. And French, of course, was the language of those in power. English was not considered to be as fancy of a language and not worthy of the written word in most cases. The other language that was used quite often for written documents was Latin, and that would have been mostly church documents because Latin, as we know, was still the official language of the church. So Canterbury Tales is one of the first pieces of literature, other than Beowulf, that is written in the language that we speak today, the English language. So we already talked about some changes brought about by William the Conqueror. There was more European business exposure. England becomes more stable and more powerful during this period. Some professions take shape, like to be a soldier, a lawyer, or a doctor, and many of those professions you will meet in Canterbury Tales. In addition to English, people spoke Norman and French. Now, the English is what Chaucer spoke and what he wrote in, but it is Middle English, and we will still need a translation in order to understand it. Okay. Chaucer was born into the rising middle class of the 15th century. So he was aware of people all in the social pyramid in the middle, of course, where he was, but he also knew people above him. He trained for a career in the court of King Edward III. He served in the army, held governmental positions, and eventually married a lady of the court. So Chaucer was aware of all different types of people above and below him in the social pyramid. Canterbury Tales is one of the first books ever printed. Chaucer planned to write 120 tales, 2 told by each pilgrim on the way to a shrine and 2 on the return trip. So just as a refresher, a pilgrim does not always mean the American Thanksgiving pilgrims. These are not the Puritans that Chaucer is writing about. To go on a pilgrimage is to go on a journey with a religious intention. These pilgrims in Canterbury Tales are from all walks of life. They want to go on a trip because it is springtime. They are essentially on spring break. They're excited about the good weather. They're excited about the new life and the new flowers blooming in April, and they want to take a journey really for the fun of it. Some pilgrims are concerned about religion. Others really are just on the trip for fun. So it depends on which pilgrim we're talking about. These are all imagined characters, but they most likely are based on real people that Chaucer knew. They are also from all over the social pyramid, some nobility, such as the knight, and others at the very bottom, agricultural laborers, and everyone in between. So these imagined characters, Chaucer writes of them as if they are going on a religious journey, but that's really just the excuse for us to meet all of them. Each pilgrim gets to tell a story, or at least that's how Chaucer envisioned it. And these stories are meant to be their entertainment on the way to and from the shrine of Thomas à Becket. Canterbury Tales is a long work, and it is a very comprehensive anthology of medieval life and medieval popular taste, but it is unfinished. Chaucer envisioned 120 tales, 2 told by each pilgrim on the way and 2 on the way home, but he only completed 22 and 2 fragments. Okay. And Canterbury Tales is essentially important because it comments on the people and problems of this time period. Okay, here is the real story behind the shrine, the trip that the characters are taking. Before the selection begins, Archbishop Becket was murdered in 1170 by 4 knights of Henry II. King Henry and Becket had a long-standing feud. Remember that tension that exists between the monarch and the church and the power struggle right from the beginning. King Henry and Becket had a feud, and thinking that the king wished Becket dead, 4 of Henry's knights went to Canterbury to commit murder. The king was too late to stop them, and St. Thomas of Becket was murdered in his own cathedral. Later, he was canonized as a saint. So the pilgrims are all going to visit Canterbury, where the shrine of Thomas Becket resides. Beginning, we'll meet all of the pilgrims. Chaucer invents this story and places himself as a pilgrim in the prologue. So Chaucer is not the host, and this is not a real life event. He's simply imagining that he's along for the ride with all of these different characters. And in the beginning, we meet them, and Chaucer gives us his opinion of them. Then we launch into the individual stories. Each character is meant to tell a tale, and whoever wins the contest, whoever tells the best story, wins dinner at a pub at the end of the journey. So what we get is an anthology of popular taste in the Middle Ages. These varied groups viewed the purpose of literature to be both entertaining and morally instructive. So in order for it to be the winning story, the character has to both entertain but also teach morality, because everybody in the medieval period wanted to go to heaven. During Chaucer's time, the more literature stressed moral and instructive aspects, the more it was regarded as high art. Okay, so just a reminder, Canterbury Tales is in iambic pentameter, a line of verse with 5 metrical feet. Feet, a foot of poetry, just refers to repeated meter within the line of poetry. So there's 5 feet in a line of iambic pentameter. Each foot has 2 syllables. So iambic pentameter always has 10 syllables per line. In order for it to be iambic pentameter, it has to go unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed, unstressed, stressed. So it's 10 syllables, and when you divide it into 5 feet, the unstressed stress pattern repeats all the way until the end of the line. Shakespeare wrote in iambic pentameter, this is from Shakespeare, 2 households, both alike in dignity. So that is iambic pentameter, and that was the popular form of poetic verse from the medieval period, but also we know Shakespeare later in the Renaissance will write in this type of poetry. Okay. Chaucer also favored rhyming couplets, which means 2 lines of poetry that have the same meter, iambic pentameter, but also have end rhyme. So end rhyme just means that the lines end with rhyming words. If it was internal rhyme, there would be a rhyme inside the line of poetry. but here we just have end rhyme. Double, double, toil and trouble, fire burn, and cauldron bubble. So we will see iambic pentameter, 10 syllables per line, and there will be rhyming couplets at the end of every 2 lines of poetry. So remember, in the medieval period, poetic verse was the popular form of storytelling, and Chaucer was writing. We've moved beyond Anglo-Saxon poetry, and now we're much closer to Shakespeare in much neater, more precise meter, and an overall rhyme scheme. Remember, Anglo-Saxon poetry didn't rhyme. It just had those repeated alliteration and some of the other techniques like keenings. Here, we're getting closer to Shakespearean style poetry. Okay. All right. So our first task is to meet all of the pilgrims, and then we will be covering 2 of the short stories. For AP, you guys will be reading The Wife of Bath's Tale and The Pardoner's Tale. So that goes for AP, Honors, and CP. For the applied level, we will actually be reading The Pardoner's Tale only, okay, and possibly some short story versions of Canterbury Tales if we have time. Okay, that's it for today.